So great to see you again, Nancy Loucas from CAPHRA. So why don't you just dive in and tell us all about what you've been up to this year? It's been a while since we spoke, so not just you personally, but also CAPHRA as an organization. So start from there, from January up until now.
Oh, wow. There's been a lot going on, obviously. This year is obviously it's a COP year. So what that means is that there's a lot of activities that are around getting in contact with delegations, finding out what the plans are, what the WHO is planning. So there's been a lot of research and there's been a lot of submissions. And, meanwhile, at the same time, countries are still dealing with their own local regulations and frameworks and things like that. So it's been a very, very busy year. The highlights, I guess, we've been involved working with our global partners in advocacy on a couple of campaigns. One was a letter that was sent to the UN Human Rights Commission about the right to health and how the WHO, FCTC, and their plans for limiting access to safer nicotine products kind of goes against the protocol. There's been letters from various countries in Asia Pacific to their governments and to their delegations saying, number one, there should be a consumer on the delegation because obviously they're the main stakeholder. Of course, crickets with that. There's been letters sent to them with regards to another white paper that we wrote to kind of explain to them. A shadow report is the best way to explain it. Now, for those who don't know what a shadow report is, the United Nations has this function within it for shadow reports. And what shadow reports do is they give decision makers information that they might not ordinarily get, say, from the WHO FCTC. So we've done a shadow report. We've submitted that to governments and delegations. Of course, again, crickets. So we've been doing a lot of work that you don't get much feedback on, but it's still participating in the process, even though we're being excluded. Now, in terms of conferences and whatnot, obviously we all went to the GFN in Poland last June, participated in that. And this year we were invited, some of the consumers were invited to the GTNF in Seoul, South Korea. And we were on a consumer panel, which was interesting because that's usually an industry event. Interestingly enough, though, I keep saying interestingly enough, though, a lot of the industry people came up to us and were talking to us and they're like, wow, we had no idea. I find that sad in one way and interesting in another. And I say that because the majority of the information the industry gets about us as consumers isn't from us. It's from market researchers and third parties. So a lot of them were just like, wow, we can actually talk to a real life consumer. It's like, yeah, we're real life consumers. Gives them a perspective that they don't get from, market research. And I found the correlation between that and what's going on in WHO FCTC very similar. You've got one group here, yeah, they're industry and they're willing to listen and they want to talk and they ask really good questions. And then you've got this other on the other side, and I hate to put it that way, but that's the only way I can put it, where, WHO FCTC doesn't want to borrow us. They don't want to know about us. They're using every possible tactic that they can to exclude us from the process. So it's a very interesting place to be a consumer in the middle of that, in the middle of the war, I guess. So we did that. And now we're heading into Asia Harm Reduction Forum, which will be taking place in Manila next week, actually the 19th, I believe, of October in Manila. So we're doing that. And then into November, again, because it's a COP year, we're going to be doing Scope, but it'll be a whittled down version because there is a consumer event happening on the ground in Panama during COP week. So we're just an ancillary to that at this point. And what we'll do is, because of the time differences, we will rebroadcast a lot of the stuff that they give us so that people in the Asian side of the world can see what's going on in Panama, because the time difference is just too crazy to work together. I'm not going to be up at 3 in the morning. I love everybody, but no. So that's kind of where we're at. So we're kind of heading towards the end goal here, which is the COP10.
Yeah. Do you mind explaining to our viewers what SCOPE is, in case some people aren't aware?
Yeah, SCOPE is it's an acronym for Streaming Consumers on Point Everywhere, and it was developed at the last COP meeting for us consumers to be able to get our voices out there. So basically, it's a live stream. And different groups from around the world participate in this, and they talk about the issues that affect them as consumers around regulation, around legislation, and around, their use and their experience and their testimonies about how, vaping or snus has helped them to kick the habit of combustible or unsafe oral tobacco. So it's a consumer-driven live stream to provide people with a platform to talk about their stories, talk about their experiences, and also to provide information for people who may just come by and go, hey, what are consumers thinking? Well, here, we also let people come online. We let people come into the room, and it's open discussions, so people can get together and talk. Because one of the big things that being a consumer advocate, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, it can be very isolating. Because, I'm sitting here, in New Zealand, and somebody's sitting there, in Saskatchewan, Canada. It can be very isolating. So by using the technology again, by using the technology, we can all get together and talk and support each other and share information. And that's one of the beautiful things about it. So that's what Scope is.
Okay. And this year there's been some interesting developments in New Zealand. I know you're based in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Could you just summarize some of the submissions, some of the changes, things that have been going on in New Zealand with vaping, and regulation?
Yeah. Well, what happened in New Zealand, and I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm going to say it, is the Bloomberg effect has arrived in New Zealand. There has been a push from various sides about a youth vaping epidemic. There have been some NGOs that have, done their own research, which of course wasn't peer reviewed, and, touting these really high levels of youth vaping. In saying that, though, the youth vaping rate has gone up, not as exponential as some would like you to believe, but at the same time, the smoking rate has gone down. So now, one of the ways the New Zealand government has decided to address it is to amend the regulations. As a side note, the regulations themselves are fine. The problem is enforcement or lack of enforcement. They don't want to hear that. Okay, resources, whatever. So now they're going in, and one of the things they've done is they've got the generation end game for tobacco smoking. They have changed the requirement that names on e-liquids can only be very basic, so you can't have any like fancy names. It has to be like berry or tobacco or vanilla. You can't use a name like, strawberry shortcake. Just, you can't do it. Okay. They are also planning on limiting the amount of outlets that can sell vape to 600 throughout the country, the same number as for tobacco retailers in the country. So they're coming up with all of these they look really good on paper, these ideas, but the concern is that the practical application of them will most likely lead to a gray or a black market, and therefore now they've lost any control over the process. Interestingly enough, the youth vaping issue, the majority of these kids are not buying them at dairies or vape shops, obviously. They're getting them from friends and family. Now, of course, you can't enforce that. You can't really regulate that. But they're coming down hard on the retailers. Another aspect of this, is we have the Vaping Regulatory Authority here, and they're the people that are supposed to be, they're legislated, mandated to actually issue the license for the vape shops. And they're just rubber stamping them. They're not following, the mandate of, due diligence, and is it a separate, building. So pretty much they've decided that originally they legalized vaping and rubber stamped everybody to sell vape without actually following what was in the regulations, okay, and in the legislation. That's why I said originally, the regulations and the legislation itself are fine. It's the enforcement or the lack of enforcement. So now they're trying to catch up. And obviously, because it's a cop year, they're catching up, and it's all about optics. I mean, my personal opinion, for whatever it's worth, is that a lot of the stuff that they're doing here in New Zealand is about optics. It's to look good when they go to the cop. I don't think that there's going to be a medicalized situation here in New Zealand for a couple of years. I do think that that's sitting out there in the background. I think the possibility exists simply because of what's going on in Australia, and if they can't get the youth vaping epidemic under control. Now, the problem with this whole idea of the youth vaping epidemic is that it doesn't exist. But that doesn't matter because people believe it exists. So therefore, how can you get rid of something that doesn't exist?
Mm.
So that's kind of what we're up against here in New Zealand.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that, sorry, carry on.
No, carry on.
So CAPHRA, and you in particular as part of CAPHRA, released an interesting media statement earlier on in the year about, it was called "Are Big Pharma Driving Anti-Vape Campaigns?" If you remember that one. But that was a really interesting piece, actually. And I don't see much about pharma and anti-vape campaigns in the industry, actually. Do you want to just summarize what that said? I think that was quite an interesting.
I'll summarize the concept. How's that? Because I've done so many things, just like I can't give you word for word. Big pharma, it's nothing new. Okay. Those people who are aware of how this works will say that, pharma doesn't create cures, they create customers. I wouldn't say that's 100% true in all areas, but when it comes to nicotine replacement therapies and it comes to the modalities of how we're going to help people, yes, it does. And the reason I said that, and we issued that press release, was because you can go into any supermarket here in New Zealand and you can get Nicorette gum or these Nicotrol inhalers and all of these things, right? And they're perfectly okay. Over the counter. They're perfectly okay. But we're going after vape. Same basic concept, especially with the inhalers. They come in fruity flavors. When you look at it from an economic standpoint, from a corporate standpoint, pharma is losing a lot of money by vaping being so popular, okay? And because of that, they're trying to claw back their revenue, their profit, right? Same thing that a lot of, these anti-people are saying about, tobacco. The only reason they're going into safer nicotine products is to claw back their, their revenue that they're losing from combustibles. Well, let's throw government in the middle of this, okay? Government benefits on both sides from that. Okay, if pharmaceutical companies are making a lot of money, they're able to offer subsidized medicines much cheaper to governments. If governments are collecting a lot of tobacco excise, they're using that for things that, were supposed to be health related, but as we've seen in the States, that's not what happened. Okay, it's about money, and pharma is intrinsically involved in that. And, when you look at it from a corporate standpoint, and this is kind of hard for a lot of people to understand, companies are beholden to their stakeholders. They're beholden to making money for their stakeholders. Okay, that's not a crime. The way you go about doing it is the problem. And with big pharma, they just seem, what was the guy in the States with the diabetes, with the diabetic medication, let's make as much money as we can. Poor people in the States had diabetes and they couldn't afford the medicine because this guy was selling it for like $1,000 a pill. That's what I was addressing. Okay, is there's many players involved in this, and many of them don't have the best interests of the consumer or the client or the customer at mind. So we're sitting here saying, hey, wait a minute, what about this? And why is this allowed, but then this is not allowed? How dare we? Because now we're stepping on their toes. That's what it was about.
Yeah, very interesting. And then just lastly, so back in June, there was another press release on CAPHRA's site that called for submissions to the New Zealand government for their proposals to cap nicotine concentrations in disposable vapes. And CAPHRA said that this could actually have a negative effect on public health in New Zealand and dissuade people from trying alternatives. Do you want to just expand a bit on how that could be negative for public health in your own words?
Well, one of the things that we found in New Zealand is that people who are heavy smokers, and you've got to understand that in New Zealand, we also have a lot of people that do rollies, so hand-rolled tobacco, right, with or without filters. A lot of those people, when they make the transition, they're at very high nicotine rates, the 50 milligram nic salts. The reason they do that is because it replicates the feel in their throat and it gives them what they need. Okay. If the government limits that and brings it down to 20 milligrams for nic salt, just like they have for freebase, that removes that aspect of satisfaction that may cause some people to just say, why am I even bothering? Okay. Now, the government's response to that, of course, was, well, we're going to limit the amount of tobacco outlets that are available. Okay. Once you start limiting the amount of tobacco outlets and the amount of vape outlets and the amount of nicotine that's available in something, what have you just done? You've just handed it to, we already have gangs here. Now you've handed it to a gray or a black market. Now people are going to get tobacco that may not be properly cured. Now people may be getting vape products that are imported from God knows where, and we don't know what's in them. That's the problem.
Yeah. And are you going to be personally in Panama for COP10 this year?
No, I'm not.
It's a long flight for you, isn't it?
Way long flight for me. It would have. I did look at it, and not only was it ridiculously expensive, it would have taken me almost 2 days to get there.
Oh, wow.
So,
is anybody from CAPHRA going, or is it just two?
Yeah, I believe one of our guys from Thailand is going, Asa Salagupta from ECST.
Okay.
I believe he's going. Yeah. But it's such a haul from Asia to go anywhere. That's why, our big thing to leave the country, to leave the area is going to GFN every year, because A, it's expensive, and B, it's a haul to get there.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Do you want to just mention the platform that you relaunched or revamped this year, where you talk about the news in the Asia Pacific region? You do a great news show.
Oh, the Advocate's Voice.
That's exactly
the Voice. Yeah. We never really didn't have it. It's usually every month, but of course, because this year's been so crazy, it's kind of been like every other month. But the Advocate's Voice is the web news show that we do, and we basically cover what's going on in the region and also globally. A lot of it for the past couple of months has been focused on the WHO, obviously, because it's COP year. It's about providing information to people who are not in our region about what's going on in our region. And it's also about providing advocates and consumers with the information they need so they understand what's going on outside of their own little micro bubble of their lives. A lot of people don't realize how threatened, if they're a vapor or they use snus, they don't realize how threatened that activity is right now with what's going on. And we're trying to give it to them and give them the facts and give them information so they're like, oh, okay, get involved, because I don't think people realize how much is at stake here. They don't realize it until it hits their front door and they're like, well, this has been going on for years, Oh, I didn't know. Well, we're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. Bring the horse to water, but you can't make it drink, kind of thing. But yeah, that's the Advocate's Voice.
I really like it. It's a really short, succinct, but engaging, fun channel. So every month, and it's on the CAPHRA website, isn't it? And I have seen it on there. Anywhere else?
It goes live on the CAPHRA YouTube channel.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. And then we share the link everywhere. And then I upload the audios from it onto Spotify so that people can actually listen to it if they don't want to watch it.
Oh, so, great. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, Nancy.